In today's video, we're going to be diving into the upcoming pattern, taking a look at that severe cold air that we've been expecting for weeks now to enter into the United States, especially the eastern half over the first 2 weeks of January. We're basically on the doorstep. We're already seeing that door kind of open a little bit as we've seen some colder air move in. We do expect some pieces of the polar vortex to move down, so this is going to be a very severe cold event and pretty long-lived as well. We're going to see that on the model guidance today. We also have multiple snowstorm risks, including one that is coming up this Sunday into Monday for a lot of the central and eastern states. It's going to be a pretty straight horizontal storm. We have seen some models start to flirt with that snowstorm around the 10th again, so we're going to be discussing some possibilities for deeper south snowfall into the southeast. We're still not seeing those very major lows like 980s or 970s that we saw last week with some of the guidance. So we've seen a weakening storm, but that doesn't really mean that there can't be very high snowfall totals. We're going to see that today. So let's dive into things, looking at the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook for January 8th through 12th. And the National Weather Service is very confident in a strong positive PNA. We call this that. It's a Pacific North American oscillation. Really all it means is warm air along western North America, and we see that for the western United States and also well up into Alaska when we look here at the bottom left of your screen. This forces the cold air into the east, and we see that sure enough happening here as well. I think this is all very relevant because that's exactly the pattern we've seen a lot here through the fall and into December, and now we're going to see that throughout the model guidance as well. Precipitation, because this cold air is so deep, it causes dryness for a lot of these areas in here. You know, we have the snowstorm for a lot of these areas here coming up just in a few days. We also have the possibility for some snowfall for these more southern areas as well. But the amount of precipitation we need to be average over this time frame is pretty high for these areas. So this doesn't mean you're going to get no snowfall or no rainfall. However, it's a little bit less than what's typical and certainly not above average. Most of our storms kind of trending far to the southeast, as you can see through these areas, because that cold air is digging so far to the south and the east here throughout that time frame. Here's the 8th through the 14th, a lot of the same. We're not going to talk about it too much, but this is for the 10th through the 16th. So we do see this extending all the way to the halfway mark of the month. And then here's the precipitation forecast for that time frame, still seeing this deeper suppressed look where we get storms mostly moving through these areas here. And that is going to bring the risk of some deeper south snowfall. We see the model showing, one or two, maybe more threats for snowfall over the next couple of weeks for this area. So pretty interesting odds for these pretty rare areas to see snowfall, especially on the southern half of this area here that I drew in. So that would be very interesting to see. Temperatures over the next 3 to 4 weeks. Keep in mind this was made on December 27th. We get an update for this actually tomorrow. So I don't know if it'll be out by the time we're making the video, but over the coming days, we will see an update to this, which I'm very, very much so anticipating. But this is for the 11th through the 24th. They've been calling for cold during this time frame, and it looks like they nailed that forecast long out. And then here's the overall January 2025 forecast from the National Weather Service, again, showing that deeper south cold, warm along the west here, even up into Alaska, basically being the trend for the majority here of January. So especially these areas here, looking at the best chance to be below average, the southeast corridor. When we move into the model guidance, we see this is the 18Z model run, the most up-to-date model run that we have so far today at the time of recording. We're going to take this towards tomorrow afternoon, and we actually do have some snow showers. I wouldn't be surprised if some areas, especially like the mountains of West Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, maybe even into Northern Virginia, Maryland, pick up 1-2 inches in some of these pockets. So keep that in mind with these snow showers, that there is some areas with the potential for some accumulating snowfall there. We do see by Saturday afternoon on January 4th, we get our upcoming first snowstorm starting to build for New Mexico and Colorado. Again, almost a directly horizontal look with this one. In the thumbnail, it's the top area. I think I made it in blue, so it's the light blue area that is this storm, storm number 1. And we're seeing this one move through. It's kind of around Arkansas, Tennessee here, and we're seeing heavier snowfall for Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, Virginia here. And we do have a very classic cold front, warm front dynamic with this storm. So there is going to be a warm southeast corridor in here. Some chance for thunderstorms and severe weather underneath this storm, keep in mind, as we move through the weekend. So we're going to be watching for that risk. And of course, the snow risk, as well as freezing rain risk on the more northern side of the storm. We do see it eventually move offshore. But again, it's almost a direct line that it's taken to get there. And we see the snowfall continuing for the Ohio Valley into the mid-Atlantic, where we could see totals upwards of 10 or so inches. So not a small snowstorm by any means, very plowable, and nearly a foot for some folks. So a pretty major one. The trajectory is very similar to some of those snowstorms we saw in 2009. And I know those were really, or 2009 to 2010, I should say. I think they actually happened in 2010, like January or February. But these storms, those years were much more intense, but I think the track is reminiscent of that for me. So areas like Maryland, DC, Delaware, southern Pennsylvania, southern New Jersey did really well. We could see these areas getting some pretty hefty snowfall with that system. Once it's done by the 7th, 8th here, what we see is cold air. This is some of the severe cold air that we've been talking about for a while now, overhead for a lot of these areas. Also a building storm way behind. We see some snowfall for New Mexico and Texas with this one, even Mexico. And this is going to want to ride along the jet stream. And we're seeing a huge northern tick on this particular model run, the 18Z. So the storm is kind of trending back to the north here. Keep in mind that this is the furthest north and therefore the snowiest solution that we've seen from the GFS model in about many different model runs. But I know it's more than the past 3. So the 12Z, the 6Z, the 0Z, this is a little bit further north than the kind of grouping of models we've had over the past day or so. So take it with a grain of salt, but it could be kind of the beginning of a trend northward and back towards the east coast with this storm, which we did discuss with you guys yesterday. We're going to see a roller coaster. It's going to go back and forth. So I think I even literally said I wouldn't be surprised to see a model bring back the snowstorm tomorrow. This is yesterday, of course. And here we are. So I didn't know I'd be that correct with that. But we do see that by the time we reach Thursday afternoon, this storm is looking pretty amped. We have some broad low pressure here in the Gulf. It's picking up a lot of moisture and intensity there. We see Oklahoma, Texas, some of Arkansas and Mississippi perhaps seeing some flakes flying. And some ice here for portions of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi. Could be impactful thing with that storm. We do see by the time we reach Friday afternoon, again, a lot further north with this storm, and the jet stream looking a lot more favorable as we have kind of it's not a straight line, but it is a more kind of, I would say, upward look with the jet stream, whereas it was almost straight horizontal in some of our previous runs. So this could pull the storm to the north. We're seeing snowfall starting out for Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, northern Georgia perhaps. As we move into the low temperatures, more and more areas get some snowfall here, 7 a.m. on Saturday, January 11th. And we do see Tennessee, Kentucky, portions of North Carolina, and then Virginia seeing some interesting snowfall with this one. The low being offshore, I would say, of the kind of border of South Carolina and North Carolina. Very, very interesting. As we keep going here, we see that even by the afternoon of the 11th, we're still seeing some Virginia, Maryland, DC, Delmarva snowfall occurring. And that continues into the overnight. The lowest we get this low down to is 990. So a good 20 millibars weaker than what we saw initially last week. So for this to be a blizzard, we would need some serious dropping of that pressure. And it's not because we don't see the heavy snowfall with this one. That's a huge misconception of what a blizzard is. But I feel like a 990 wouldn't have enough wind to be considered a blizzard. You might be wondering, why did you title the videos Models Are Showing Blizzards, right? It's because we had the pressure into the 970s. We had severe winds on the coast with those storms, and we had heavy, heavy snowfall. It almost certainly would have resulted, if hypothetically that model was completely correct, in an actual blizzard for many folks. So this is not that, though. That is not what we're seeing here on the models today. But we do get heavy snowfall for some folks, 6 to 10 easily inches, maybe more with that storm, similar to the one before it. And then we're left with a very cold pattern, through the 14th, 15th, 16th. And what's interesting is right around that 15th Wednesday date, we get another low trying to form here in a very similar area over the Gulf. Some snowfall again for Texas and Oklahoma, perhaps. And as we keep going, you notice it's kind of approaching Florida here with a lot of this intensity. And the jet stream is horizontal. Whereas the storm before it, I'll do it in yellow so we get some contrast here. But your jet stream was much more vertical with that first one. And that's a massive difference. The tilt of the jet stream and really where this storm would even be able to go. That is a big time difference maker. So as we move forward, we see that storm kind of bring some snowfall to the deeper south, pretty light amounts. It never really develops into too strong of a low and it moves out innocently. But I think the biggest thing here is this is the very end of the model run Saturday on the 18th. We see continued signs of some cold still in the east. It's not quite as intense as what we're seeing here, especially the 5th through the 12th, but there is still cold around enough for snowfall, and January is looking overall very cold. I mean, when I look at it, we just looked at the 2nd through the 18th. I mean, very impressive stuff. The thing to note here is we do actually have some cold and snow out west, so maybe we start to get a negative PNA going, but the trend has been that these PNAs, these positive PNAs, redevelop really quickly and rebound. So we'll have to wait and see what ends up actually happening with that. But interesting to see a model kind of showing cold continuing for much longer than originally anticipated. European model here, we're not going to see the second snowstorm, but of course we're going to see the first one. Here's those snow showers, by the way, over the mid-Atlantic by tomorrow afternoon. Quite heavy. Again, 1 to 2 inches would not surprise me for some folks with that one. And then we get our first snowstorm here, snowstorm number 1 getting going. It moves through the plains, Midwest, Ohio Valley. And on the eastern end of things, there's a lot more ice in here. We see this ice really getting going for Kentucky, West Virginia, Virginia. Very, very interesting to see. Snowfall on the northern end. It's a little bit of a messier storm, and then that eventually moves out. But really, we would end up with very, very large snowfall totals. This is the 0Z European model run. We do see that second storm does not come in, but we do get this deep cold here Friday the 10th here, Saturday the 11th, and this is a deep digging trough. We see the west coast, a lot of the plains here, and then it's basically just funneling this Arctic air almost directly southward all the way to the Gulf, seeing pretty deep Arctic air. So that's when that very severe cold comes in. We're basically left with no coastal storm. We do, however, around the 14th, see this model do something interesting. We have a jet stream that looks a little bit more sufficient for snowstorms with a trough centered over the central states. Your jet stream, again, ascending over the east. We end up getting a low trying to form in here, initially bringing snowfall to Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, perhaps Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee in there. And as we move forward towards the afternoon, we see this does actually move up into the mid-Atlantic a little bit and then into the northeast, but we don't get too much snowfall, although it does try to redevelop this low around 7 p.m. on Wednesday, January 15th, kind of moving it up the coast from there. So that would be interesting to see something along those lines, bring some pretty heavy snowfall before moving out. So we still have these models flirting with, I would say, between the two of these, 4 separate potential snowstorms over the next 15 days. It's going to be interesting to track with you guys. It is disappointing, I have to share with you guys, that we have so much cold and we are seeing an overall drier pattern set up. And I think that it really just is how intense the cold air is. I know you would think that for snow, cold is a good thing, but there is such thing as too much. And I think we're in that territory now where it's just overbearing and that jet stream is so suppressed that we almost are losing some of the potential for snowfall with how deep that jet stream goes. As disappointing as that is, if the cold was much more mild, we'd actually have a much better chance. We do get some moving through here, though, not enough to be above average, but there is inches of liquid precipitation. So like I said, this doesn't mean no precipitation. We do see some pretty large storms moving through this area, also the northwest. So let's look at the anomalies here over the next 15 days. And yes, everything is pretty much drier except for the more central states and Rockies. But there is some precipitation moving through this area, enough to where snowfall will still be a possibility, of course. Here's the snowfall. This is the accumulated positive total snow depth change. So let's move this back to where we get there's the first snowstorm. So this is what I was mentioning, a couple of inches in here wouldn't be surprising over the next couple of days. And then here's once we add snowstorm number 2, where we get as far as what actually accumulates 6 to 10 in the purple areas like Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia here. Definitely seeing some pretty heavy snowfall, and then even into Maryland and the rest of the Delmarva. Those 6 to 10 inch totals. Now, for anything in the long range, I explained this yesterday, but we're going to go into the actual snowfall total because it's really hard to calculate this later on, although that's the 6Z run, so let's do this. Once we move past, we get this second snowstorm in here, which we'll point out in a second, but that adds to the totals throughout these areas too. But notice, versus the GFS model, we don't have any of the deep south snowfall there, so there's a huge, huge disagreement. When we do the 4-day total snowfall, here's that next one that we kind of see on the European model at the very end. A lot more vertical, as you can see, moving from Texas all the way up into New England and everywhere in between. Looks like this one would be another potential 6 to 10 inch snowstorm. Nothing too crazy, but certainly plowable, and maybe some areas hitting a foot. So it is a major snowstorm, but it's not earth-shattering. Now the GFS total snowfall is a lot different. We see higher totals with snowstorm number 1, where we're seeing, even over a foot for some of these areas, especially west of the Appalachian Mountain Range, so mostly for the Midwest, Ohio Valley area. And then we get this second pocket of snowfall here, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and then the deeper south into the southeast, where we get a little bit more of a vertical push with this snowstorm, where we're able to get some here in the mid-Atlantic. When we look at the 3-day snowfall here, I want to move towards that second snowstorm here. Let me do the 4-day. We're not getting enough range. There we go. So we get a good couple pockets of 6 to 10, like northern Texas, areas in the Smoky Mountains, and then areas here in eastern Virginia as well as the Delmarva. So pretty interesting stuff. Again, you get one more tick to the north where the snowstorm is tracking a little bit further north. It'd probably be something a little bit more like this. All of a sudden, it's game on again for a lot of these areas in here. So we would be watching very closely. We will be watching very closely for that. I still expect this to be a roller coaster. We could see some trends back to the south. We could see some more ticks to the north. We're going to be tracking it together, though. It's going to be very fun. A zoomed in look here for you guys. I mean, a lot of high totals in here for like Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Iowa. We're even seeing Pennsylvania, West Virginia. Again, the Appalachian Mountain Range in here doing pretty well, especially over the mid-Atlantic. And then areas in Virginia through like the Delmarva, Jersey, southern Pennsylvania, across the 2 snowstorms, all kind of equaling out at plowable levels of snowfall. When we look at the European model's temperature pattern, we see that we are cooling. We're colder than normal already here for today. For tomorrow, on the 3rd, we're getting a bit colder. 4th here, even colder, with the greens kind of being widespread. Again, that's 10 to 15 degrees below normal. But it's going to get even worse after our first snowstorm moves through. That's when we start getting the severe cold in these kind of purplish blues, 15 to 25 degrees below normal. Some magentas in there, 25 to 35 degrees below normal. That moves over a lot of the mid-Atlantic. So we are seeing huge departures from what's typical. As we get after the 10th, we see that warmth kind of beginning to push in. We actually get a little bit of a milder spell before more cold air comes in around the 15th, 16th, 17th. So no real end in sight for the cold, but I will say we have trended colder now for the west as we go on further in, which would be a negative PNA and would eventually likely encourage at least warmth in the east. It wouldn't for sure bring warmth, but that's definitely going to tilt the odds in that favor, of course. When we look at the GFS, I mean, I want to get mostly towards the long range because we're obviously descending into colder temperatures, but we do see a little bit of a colder look, especially 15th, 16th, 17th here, 18th, and we retain some of the warmth at least out west. So a little bit more of a favorable look here on the GFS model for continued cold air. We're going to look at some long range models now, which will also kind of bode well in the direction of longer patterns of cold air here. This is the 2nd through the 9th, and we really see strong areas of cold throughout all of these areas. Again, 2nd through the 9th. When we move towards the 7th through the 14th, this moves deeper into the southeast like we've been talking about. 14th through the 21st, still rather cold. But we also see the west cooling, as we mentioned earlier, on some of our models. And then what we see for the 21st through the 28th is an averaged outlook where we really don't have any information to take away anymore. Here on the GFS extended ensemble model, what we see is the 1st through the 8th, again, rather cold. Here's the 7th through the 14th, though, where we get it deeper into the southeast. 14th into the 21st, we do see the warmth kind of being more retained here out west, and this is why we see deeper cold being retained a little longer here through the 21st. And here's the 21st through the 28th, where this model still points most of the cold towards the east. This would be crazy if we finished up January in this fashion. One more long-range model to go, and here's the 3rd through the 10th on our CFS model, rather cold. 7th through the 16th, again, pretty similar, or 7th through the 14th, better yet, very similar to our other models, maybe a little colder even in the southeast. 14th through the 21st, this model gets us even colder during this time frame, and then 21st through the 28th staying rather cold, but again, coast to coast cold, not very common. I'm thinking this model's getting a little averaged out by this point. Anyway, we will continue to track all of this with you guys as we still are juggling around some snowstorms that need to be watched and have pretty decent potential. The cold air is coming. We are already descending into it. As I mentioned, the door is already kind of slightly opened, so we're getting there. It's going to get worse before it gets better, so buckle up. Be sure to subscribe. We're going to be talking about all of these things every single day. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications when we upload so you never miss one. Be sure to like the video if you did enjoy it, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.